Welcome to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. This is my podcast where we talk about all issues from taxation to indoctrination. And today I have in the studio with me Laurie Higgins. She's the cultural writer for Illinois Family Institute. She also previously was an English teacher at Deerfield High School. She has a vast amount of experience dealing with cultural issues. She's been watching what's been happening in schools and also just out there in other areas for a very long time. Her history on many of these topics goes back a couple decades. She's extremely informed. She's a very good writer. And today I have her in specifically about some of the cultural issues that are happening in, no surprise, our schools. They have been a hotbed of indoctrination, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse. And Laurie, I'm going to start out with an article that you wrote called Ideologically Grooming Kids in Schools. And you write that on April 7th, Florida preschool teacher, 28-year-old Lois Schwartz, boasted about teaching her students that she is neither a boy nor a girl and that she is polyamorous, a pagan witch. Now, this is coming from that TikTok video place called Libs of TikTok. And Tucker Carlson covered it on his program last night, that essentially they've been banished from Twitter. They've been taken down. You know, it's not as easy to find Libs of TikTok. And that was simply, and in fact, the person who started Libs of TikTok has been harassed to the point that she is in hiding right now. Right. So apparently this topic is taboo. We can't expose teachers and what they're talking about in the classroom. Because to do so is to upend things. At the same time, we all know our children are being indoctrinated in schools. And from your point of view, this has been happening a lot longer than most of us think.
Oh, it's been happening for a very long time. I worked at Deerfield High School. Well, I went to work for IFI in 2008. I had worked for a decade at Deerfield High School before that. It was going on, I would say, intensely, probably my last 3 years, which included critical race theory. I was confronting it with my administration for the last 3 years that I was there, saying I wasn't actually opposing it. I was saying, if we're going to do this at every professional development meeting we had, the staff and faculty, at every meeting, we were presented with resources that affirm ideas derived from critical race theory. I'm being very careful on how I say that because the left keeps saying, oh, that's an academic theory and that's not taught in public schools. No, it's not taught as an academic theory, but the ideas derived from it have been taught in public schools for a very long time.
But you're talking about them being taught to the administration, to the staff.
Teachers.
So you were indoctrinated first so that you could then indoctrinate the kids
Exactly.
with these same sort of ideas.
Exactly. And that's a really interesting point because I've been trying to get parents to look into what's going on in professional development since I started with IFI. And people, I think they kind of dismiss it. Well, that's professional development. That's just what teachers are going to. But professional development is to develop you professionally. It's to take these ideas and get them into the classroom. And they were in the classroom. I'll just give one example.
Okay.
I was working with a student on her she was taking a class that was an integrated English and history, and so she did her paper. She came in to get help with it. I worked full time in the writing center, and I got done reading it, and I said, "Boy, you really have a dim view of America." And she said, I should give them this background. The two teachers who taught it are very leftist, the social studies teacher and the English teacher, and
we're talking, 15 years ago.
Oh yeah,
okay.
For sure. This was probably around 2000. I would say 6.
Okay, some
yes.
new phenomena. This is a long
right.
time ago. Okay,
right. And she said, and I said, "Boy, you really have a dim view of America." And she said, "Oh, by the end of first semester in American Studies, I hated America and hated being an American." And she said it in a very kind of lighthearted, jovial way, and I was thinking, good job, teachers. Like, I'm sure that's what we send our kids. Now, the reason they were teaching, they liked Howard Zinn, who wrote The People's History of the United States. All of these have, in Paulo Freire is another one that people may have heard of. He's a Brazilian Marxist who wrote The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. These ideas, they share in common, whether it's Howard Zinn or critical race theory and, Derek Bell and the people who, Kimberly Crenshaw, all the sort of founders of that set of ideas, they all share in common a couple of things.
Okay.
One is a really imbalanced view of American history. So no one has ever whitewashed American history. I'm 67. I learned about it when I learned about slavery and terrible things that have gone on in history when I was in school. And so they've never whitewashed history. What the left wants to do now is to have a really skewed view, and that's what they want to teach kids, because they want them to adopt that view that America is distinctly oppressive and that our policies and practices have been particularly onerous and evil around the world. And they also have this idea of dividing people up into groups according to, well, who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. And we all know which group those are. You know, if you're white and male and heterosexual, you're automatically an oppressor. So those ideas have been disseminated in classes since I was working at Deerfield High School, and that's one school.
Well, now the new oppressed class is obviously the transgender group.
Right.
So they're now oppressed. They need to be celebrated. They need to be given carte blanche to do whatever they want to in school. Whether it's guys going on the girls' sports team, whether guys going into the girls' locker room, girls going into the guys' locker room. I mean, these people are the ones. And by the way, this is now new. This is guidance. This is non-regulatory guidance coming down from the Illinois State Board of Education that specifically states a couple different things. And this guidance came down with Governor Pritzker's new State Board of Education. They put out guidance in 2019. You can find it on the website. Go ahead, have at it. But I mean, that guidance says a few things. One, it says that if you are a student and you want to pretend that you're the opposite sex at school, then the school has no responsibility at all to tell your parents about that. So you can hide that you are pretending to be somebody that you're not at school, and the school is going to be fine with that. Number two is that transgender students have full capacity to go into any locker room that they want to or bathroom. That is non-regulatory guidance. When I say non-regulatory, that means it has not been put into law that way, but it is guidance that's been directed from ISB to other school districts. And the other thing is like also on overnight field trips, there's non-regulatory guidance that basically says you school do not have to inform parents that your child may actually be rooming on an overnight school field trip with somebody of the opposite sex.
Right. Exactly.
So, I mean, it goes on and on and on about supporting all this. And a lot of this is stemming from where I really wanted to kind of get to is that, the masks are off. Okay, we kind of won that debate. Took a hell of a long time to do it. Should have never been this drawn out. The schools, I mean, they're never going to apologize for the COVIDian policies they put in place that harm kids. But for them, it was a distraction to all the other harm they're doing to children, which has to deal with this social emotional learning.
Right.
And I don't know if that was the buzz phrase when you were teaching in Deerfield High School, but it is certainly the buzz phrase that has been around now for at least 8 years. I mean, because when I started in the Springfield as a legislator, we were talking then about social emotional learning, standards, support systems, assessments, you name it. And they're taking that to a new level. And as COVID was a distraction, they were putting in place all this other stuff. And now they're using COVID as even a more reason to delve into the social emotional learning thing, because kids were mentally, there was challenging times during COVID.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I wrote about social emotional learning probably in that my first year, which was 2008 or 2009.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the premier organizations that promotes this is called CASEL, CASEL.
Yes.
And so that has been around for a very long time. And I used to say many times when I was working at Deerfield High School, the teachers have expanded their role, what they think is their appropriate role in the lives of other people's children.
Yes.
And
that's, by the way, let me pause you right there.
Yeah.
That's why I'm wearing my Parents Matter shirt. Parents matter, but they don't think so.
Right.
They believe they know how to parent better than you do. Go ahead.
And what's really interesting about that is that the left is always saying, these are the experts. These are the experts, and they don't explain how are they the experts. So you have an English teacher who got their 4-year undergraduate degree in English or science or something, and they're an expert on social emotional learning. What? Because they went to a conference in the summer, and now that makes them an expert. And also, expertise.
And by the way, a lot of times these people, they're childless. They're fresh out of college. They may not even paid their first property tax bill. I mean,
right.
Give me a break.
Right. You have a young
Like,
English teacher, and she's going to be,
Yes.
or a health teacher who are the PE teachers. No offense, some of my favorite teachers that were actually allies of mine when I was at Deerfield High School, and it got really, really rough for me there. Only because, and actually what was interesting about that, it was only because I was saying on these two topics, critical race theory and sexuality, I was saying, because they were really promoting leftist understandings or assumptions about the nature and morality of homosexuality at the time. I was simply saying, if you're going to present resources that do that, we are an educational institution. You have to present and spend equal time on writers who dissent from those ideas. Maybe it's not a novel. Maybe it's, an essay written by someone like Robert George, really elevated scholars.
Yep.
And
Ryan
so
T.
they,
Anderson.
exactly. But not at the time that I was working at Deerfield High School, I went to did a search at the school library, through the database for all resources that were from the left's perspective on sexuality, and I used all sorts of different search terms. We had like 75 resources, I think, promoting leftist views of homosexuality in our library. 0 from a conservative perspective, from someone like Ryan Anderson or Robert George, or there's Tony Essel and lots of people.
Yes.
So and they're spending our money to do this to kids, and for saying we should have diversity of views on this topic.
Right.
I was persona non grata, which is why people have to be courageous on this issue, because you can't wait for 100 people to come along behind you. It's going to take a long time for that. If it could in your school.
Well, back to social emotional learning, though. I mean, this is sort of an insidious idea that, first of all, there's two concepts here. One, we've had a number of children, even when we were growing up, you had children that were behavioral problems.
Right.
Obviously. And there are techniques and ways to help them along and deal with them and get them to progress. But now the concept is honestly that every single child has some sort of social emotional learning problem, and that it needs to be solved by the school, not the parent. I mean, that is their perception.
Right.
They think that they look at every single child and wonder what's in your background, what's happening at your home, and how can we intervene. I think that is really what's driving some of this.
Right. And they don't, and we have, there's different, when you're dealing with social and emotional learning, there's a whole background of other issues that come into play.
Yeah.
Like it's not like going to the doctor because you have, an illness or an infection, and they give you, some antibiotics or something, and it's straightforward and there's a protocol. This involves a lot of sort of ideological assumptions about how do you address this problem? Is it a problem? Because they'll feel like conservative parents who believe that, for example, homosexual acts are not moral acts and marriage is an intrinsically sexually differentiated union, that those parents, their ideas are evil, they're wicked, they're hurtful, they're harmful. That is an assumption. It is not an objective fact. There's no consensus on that. So they're operating, when they're treating someone who they view as having a problem, they are operating on a whole set of assumptions that are never articulated.
Right.
And that with which many people would disagree. And so how are they treating? That's why they're now concealing in some schools. They are mandated to conceal if a child is identifying as the opposite sex. I don't know, was it Wisconsin? I can't remember. And I'm sure there's more than one district that they actually set it out as policy for the teachers that they are to use their preferred pronouns, their names, and they are not to share this information with
That's
teachers.
what the non-regulatory guidance says from Pritzker-Zisby right now. That's what it says, non-regulatory guidance. And we know from Jay Keck writing in USA Today back again in 2019, we know that they were hiding that same situation with his daughter at Hinsdale South Hinsdale Central High School. So we know that's happening. Well, I mean, just last night I got word that the Glen Ellen School District on Monday, they started this, A Future for Everyone. Students are at the heart of all decisions. And so they set out their strategic priority goals. And this is, by the way, an elementary school. An elementary school, these were their strategic priority goals. Goal number 1, growth-focused learning. Growth-focused learning. Okay, all right, not sure what that means. How do you define growth? Number two, strategic priority goal. Priority goal, safe and inclusive environments. Safe and inclusive environments, elementary school. Okay, all members should feel welcome and valued and safe in our classrooms. schools and workplaces. We honor diversity and conduct ourselves in an ethical and respectful manner. Our students, of course, this is the same D41 that had the third grade teacher jumping up and down on the desk, saying, essentially, I'm going to indoctrinate my kids. This is what I'm about. I'm a social justice warrior in my classroom. This is the type of thing. They are going to create an equity subcommittee under the district's DEI committee, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. That's what they're going to do. So that's priority number 2. Not reading, not math, not right. I mean, by the way, these districts all 50% or less of the kids read or do math at grade level. 2 kids walk in, only 1 walks out educated. Number 3, priority goal, social emotional learning. D41 community of learners, educators, and stakeholders cultivate resourceful, resilient. Resilient. No, it says resilient. Resilient. Okay, resilient citizens by teaching social, emotional, and academic skills in a nurturing learning environment. First of all, when did you not do this? Why is that a goal? Continuing on, they're going to provide staff with in-depth training and ongoing support to promote social, emotional learning and understanding. Yeah. So I just, this is where they're headed. These are their priority goals: equity and inclusion, and then social, emotional learning. Right. What about reading, writing, and arithmetic? These are kids. Not to mention, by the way, these educators, been educators there for a long time in many cases. Were you not being inclusive before? Were you being racist? I mean, I don't understand the premise that they need this. And by the way, this is Glen Ellen.
I know. I think that, I expected when we moved to this area that it was a conservative area. Okay. And it's not.
Mm-mm.
But
no.
I just want to touch on a number of those terms.
Okay.
Of course, they're all code words. They've all been redefined.
Yes.
Safety. So that's what, when I was working at the high school and sort of challenging some of this stuff, that's the buzzword that they would use. Well, we have to make, this is the way they are able to, or justify censoring the expression of opposite ideas or dissenting ideas from leftist ideas, is to say, well, we got to keep kids safe. Mm-hmm. Well, they've redefined safety. And what safety really means is not being exposed to ideas that you don't like, that make you feel uncomfortable, that makes you unsafe. And so, you just heard that last week when, was it Michael Knowles was speaking at some campus and they were screaming at him saying, that he's making the place unsafe. And so all they have to do, they don't even have to make an argument then. All they have to do is say, well, we feel unsafe. Well, maybe Christian kids, theologically orthodox Christian kids.
Second grader feels unsafe?
Right, exactly. Because
you're making them unsafe.
Right, except for they feel unsafe because they've now been indoctrinated into thinking that if you feel uncomfortable with the expression of an idea, that means you're unsafe. They have switched out what the real meaning of safety, like you are not going to be physically harmed, and filled it in, in a very Orwellian fashion, filled it in with meaning uncomfortable. And so that's the way that they can get, it's like a real, the problem is we don't challenge them on it. And it's the same thing with inclusive. It's the same thing with, being supportive. It doesn't mean support them as a human being. It means support them in everything they feel and everything they believe and everything they desire and everything they do.
Right.
And so, but they don't apply that consistently. And that's the really interesting part. They don't apply it to Christian kids who will feel uncomfortable when they are constantly, accused or their ideas are being targeted as making people unsafe or transphobic or homophobic, which means, irrational fear or hatred of someone. And so they don't worry about how those kids feel when they are
when they don't want to go on an overnight trip and have to room with somebody of the opposite sex.
Right.
How is that safe?
Right, exactly. And no one ever demands, how do you define safety? Do you define it as you have to affirm everything that someone believes, or we have to silence and censor expression of ideas they don't like? Because if so, you're doing a fair amount of censoring right now. You're not making kids feel safe by your own definition or included. Do they think theologically orthodox Christian kids feel included in classrooms?
I don't know, but you raised a good point prior turn. You were discussing the fact that apparently D300 up in the Algonquin area is going a whole hog for the Day of Silence.
Right.
Now, I don't know if everybody understands what the Day of Silence is, but maybe you want to touch on that.
Yes.
And then let people know exactly what they're doing, because
Right.
other kids are not going to feel safe.
Right.
with
Safe
day
by
of
the
silence.
leftist
By the
definition of
leftist
that.
definition,
Right,
right.
exactly. They're going to feel very, very uncomfortable.
Intimidated. Mhm.
Right, exactly. Well, the Day of Silence was started by at the university level well over 20 years. It might be 25 years now. And this was a day to draw attention to the silenced voices of the LGBT community. And so now since it's quite obvious that their voices are not silenced, they've now changed their mission to they want to draw attention to the bullying they experience. And so
Nobody's bullied on this. Sorry.
there's
They may be ignored.
right.
They're ignored, and so if you don't celebrate them, they consider that bullying. But nobody's bullied by this.
And
Nobody is.
every school has had
ridiculous.
ample anti-bullying policy for years. They had to revise their anti-bullying policies to make it clear that cross-sex identifiers, or passers, as I call them, are particularly singled out as needing particular attention from the rest of the students. But we didn't need that, because you can just say no bullying of any student for any
That's right.
reason, and that's what
right.
should happen. So yes, so then this was first sponsored by, eventually the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, GLSEN, took over this. And then for years they've been promoting it as this is a student if parents would contact their school administrations and object to this, I should go back. On the Day of Silence, students are encouraged to remain silent during the entire day, including during instructional time. And that's the kicker on this, because as everyone knows, schools no longer engage in what we called lecturing or direct instruction. All classroom discussions, even math.
The Socratic method is not there.
Conversation, dialogue, student participation is present even in math classes, which was not the case when I was in school. So now that is disruptive to the academic process. And so then it was taken over by GLSEN, and then it was moved into high schools. Now it's moved into middle schools. I'm sure it's in elementary schools too. But this District 300, what they've done is something different. The administration has sent an email out to all parents in the community saying the administration is going to take on this project. We're going to purchase these kits that have masks, LGBT masks, and flags, and there was some other paraphernalia that they would be giving out to kids who want to be allies, implying that students who don't want to participate in Day of Silence are not allies. So what does that mean? What is an ally? An ally means someone who supports all the beliefs and assumptions, as arguable as they are. They're not supportive of that.
That could not be more divisive.
It is. And this is and parents should check because when I've talked to parents about this every spring, this happens. I believe it's this Friday. Jeannie thought it was maybe Thursday, but I think it's Friday.
Okay.
And you should check your own school.
April 21st typically, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, the date changes every year because they want it on Friday.
So it's the third Friday.
Yeah,
okay.
and then they have
all right.
And what parents need to check into if their school is allowing students, this is what I say to ask your administration, will you be allowing students to refuse to speak during instructional time? I don't care if kids are silent during passing period. That would probably be rather pleasant. But the problem is with during instructional time.
Right.
And then if they are, I always advocate pull your child out of school. If they're going to hijack it for a political purpose, then you're not going to be there that day. You're not going to participate in this. And so this is not just going on in Algonquin. This is going on at schools all over the country, middle schools and high schools.
Well, I know in District 200 here in Wheaton, Warrenville, my girlfriend a few years ago, probably 15 years ago, had it taken out. So she got it removed.
Really?
So they do not participate in it here. Now, I do think that individual students attempt to, but there's no official policy, and certainly a teacher cannot say that I'm only going to write on the chalkboard and not speak to my students. So that is not the policy. And so this is another area where parents need to get involved. And if you're in D300, they do have an active parent group up that way. I hope that they take these folks to task, because I haven't checked them up lately, but I'm sure that they're not, killing it when it comes to academic achievement either. Anyway, so, it's just another one of those things. A couple of the points I want to make. First of all, you and I, we go back we've been stirring the pot for a while here together. We've gotten in a little bit of trouble together, so to speak. And I bring up the August 2017 article that the Chicago Tribune wrote about me. Pretty interesting. Oh, hang on here. Let me find it. Sorry. Oh. Did I lose my article? How about that? Oh, yes. So you wrote this article, Christians Must Exit Government Schools. You wrote this back on August 5th, 2017. For years, conservatives have asserted that homosexuals are pursuing children, and for years, homosexual activists have mocked that claim due to either their profound ignorance or their commitment to deception as a tactic for advancing their pernicious goal of normalizing homoeroticism. Homo activists misrepresented what conservatives were claiming. And you go on to say that conservatives were worried that they would try to turn children gay, when in reality, most conservatives were claiming that homo activists were feverishly working through every cultural institution to eradicate conservative views on the nature and morality of homosexuality. In other words, homo activists were pursuing the hearts and minds of other people's children. The same goes for trans activists, and you go on and on. And you basically say Christian parents are charged by God to train up their children in the way that they should go, have no biblical warrant for placing their children all day, all year in schools that refuse to recognize the immutability and profound meaning of sexual differentiation, particularly as it relates to modesty and privacy. And then no Christian should teach in an institution that requires them to facilitate the body and soul-destroying fiction that humans can be born in the wrong body. This was not so much about homosexuality, but really about the trans movement. No Christian teacher should refer to boys and girls by opposite sex pronouns. What's interesting about this article is that you wrote this in 2017, and what did we see this week? We saw Professor Nicholas Merriweather of Shawnee State University in Ohio win his lawsuit to not have to use opposite sex pronouns. He won a 4-year lawsuit. The school's going to pay him $400,000, and he'll be allowed to go back and teach in the manner that he feels fit to do so. And because basically by forcing him to use opposite sex pronouns, it was a violation of both his free speech and religious rights. You wrote this 5 years ago.
Right. And
excuse me. So what is going on here?
We just ignored warnings. There was people, not just me warning, there are people warning before that, but I've been warning about this since 2008. I wrote my first article and this was about an Anglican priest, a woman who identifies as gender fluid or something strange. And she wrote an article saying how to make preschools trans friendly. So if people want to see that, they can go to my article from last week about ideological grooming, because I summarize the things that she advocated that preschools start doing. And I wrote that in 2008. She wrote the article, though, about which I was writing in 2005, 17 years ago. This didn't creep up on it. Didn't creep up on people. It shouldn't have taken them by surprise. But we don't pay attention. And if we do, we see things that's going to take courage that might involve some persecution, some personal suffering. And by the way, don't listen to the leftists who will mock you if you say you're being persecuted. You know that Shawnee Professor Nick Merriweather.
Yes.
If he was threatened, he got a disciplinary note written in his record, and they said there might be more consequences coming, which would have made it difficult for him to get another job. So that is persecution.
Yes.
Because you refuse to use terms, first of all, that are coerced. Secondly, that embody assumptions about human nature, anthropology, about maleness and femaleness, scientific facts. It embodies certain ideas that he could not be part of. And they don't say, well, that's his identity. His authentic identity as a Christian prevents him from doing this. There's a lot of talk about authenticity and identity on the left, but they do not respect it if it's an identity with which they disagree, that they hate, in fact. And so... Well,
I mean, it's really... It's amazing because we are coming full circle to things that you wrote years ago that others have written even before that. I find it absolutely amazing. Now, what's interesting also about this, and I just want to follow this up with how the media treats this. So I basically shared your op-ed on my Facebook. you know what, you wrote, these things are happening in public schools all around Illinois, and where they aren't, they will be soon. That's what you wrote. And all I said was I took your quote from that article and I said, and it's happening in Wheaton schools too. And this is because we had a discussion about already in Wheaton schools, they were being allowed, opposite sex were allowed to go into the other sex's bathrooms and locker rooms. We knew that. And they confirmed that was happening. The administration did. You actually called the administration, had a long discussion with them, and then you wrote about it as well. And so I simply wrote that, and the Tribune wrote a hit piece article, put it on the second page of their Sunday Tribune about this, about a Facebook post that I wrote about an article that you wrote.
Right.
It's just unbelievable how the media.
But Hunter Biden's computer was not a story.
Not a story. None of that's a story. This is where we stand. I mean, we you know, we're never getting our word out. Parents are going to have to be the people that do this, because now what you wrote 5 years ago, this is happening everywhere.
Oh, right. And, you know, we have now multiple laws here in Illinois. One requiring comprehensive sex ed. If a school teaches sex ed, it must be comprehensive, and it must start in kindergarten. And it includes addressing gender identity and sexual orientation to 5-year-olds. It starts that young. We have that law. And then we have the one that's talking that it's we have to teach the roles and contributions of homosexuals.
Yes, LGBTQ history.
Right, exactly. And you have to, it's what we're going to end up is they're going to jettison some more important achievements in the culture by people who are not LGBT in order to make room for these lesser achievements by people who identify as LGBT. But more importantly, what that law is intended to do is to say, oh, look at this person. They're creative. They've achieved this. They're smart. They're kind, whatever their good quality is, whatever their cultural contribution is. And they're homosexual, and therefore homosexuality must be okay. That's the kind of syllogistic reasoning going on, and it's intended to change the hearts and minds of very young children. That's what it is. Well, here's the interesting thing. Many Illinoisans don't. I mean, I wrote about both of those things while they were, pending in the General Assembly, and they've now been, signed into law for, the roles and contributions law, which I call the school indoctrination law. That's been a few years now.
Yes.
And people are coming and saying, oh my gosh, do you know what they're teaching my child in elementary school? And I'll say, yeah, I do. It's a law. They don't know that it's a law, and they can't believe their school is doing it.
Right.
We're not paying attention, and we're not addressing things because a lot of conservatives are cowardly.
Well, and in this entire discussion that we're having here, some people are going to be they're going to be put off by it. They're not going to want to, they're going to think that, this is just something that, you just don't agree with it. Well, first of all, facts are facts. Biological facts are biological facts when it comes to transgenderism. On the homosexual topic, is this ever a topic, really? Meant to have with young children, or children at all that aren't under your care directly.
Exactly.
That is the issue. It's the proper time and place for any of these conversations to happen, and it's not in the school system. That is the argument here.
Right.
I mean, truthfully,
because
that
all
is
of
the
those
problem.
things, sexuality is embedded with values, and for Christians, for example, those values derive from their faith. You can't teach this in a value neutral way, and even the idea that you would teach other people's children, the Florida law that DeSantis said that that the left has called "Don't Say Gay," which it isn't. It's saying you can't address these in K through 3rd grade or in inappropriate ways, which is a really important thing. Parents need to get on the ball about asking, every time your school uses the term age or developmentally appropriate, you need to ask them, what are the criteria they're using to determine age appropriateness or developmental appropriateness, and who came up with those criteria? And they need to say what they are. We don't demand that they say that. We don't demand that they articulate what those. They just say, "Oh, it's age appropriate." By whose judgment?
By whose?
I don't think any. I have a fair number of grandchildren. The oldest one is 12. Most of them know nothing about homosexuality. They're homeschooled or they're in Christian private schools, and it's not appropriate to teach a 5-year-old. How can a 5-year-old understand the bizarre notion that if you desire it, you can become the opposite sex? I mean, it's nonsense.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of where we're at. So Last thing, Illinois Family Institute, they do a great job vetting candidates. You guys have a guide out with your Illinois Family Action Guide, correct? And so if you care about these cultural issues, people are going to be able to download that guide. I think in May it's coming out, and they can go and they can research the candidates that you guys have vetted already.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct. And we have had at least one forum where we had the gubernatorial candidates come, and
I think it was the senatorial ones.
Okay,
the gubernatorial ones couldn't show up for some reason.
Oh,
so the Senate candidates showed up. Yes.
And those, I think
U.S.
you can
Senate.
see those. Yes, you can see those videos, and also you can we distribute the voter guides, which shows all the positions. Anyone who's answered it shows their positions on all the different issues, and we distribute those so you can use those, and people take them and distribute them at church and other places. Just because they're not partisan, they just give you the information about what their stands are on different issues.
Well, we've talked a lot about the sexuality issue in the school systems. I think people are uncomfortable talking about that. Quite frankly, I just do. I feel like they feel like they're going to be classified as a hater or have some sort of phobia. What I think we need to be far more cognizant of, and I'm not putting that on the backbench, is this social emotional learning, what it's going to do for kids, the surveys they want to take on your kids, how they're going to score your kids. What does that mean long term? You do not want to turn your child over to these folks who think they know better how to raise your child than you do. And that is exactly what's happening. So stay tuned, audience. Thank you, Laurie, for coming on my program. Thank you for opening up our minds to what is going on there. Again, I think the best thing that people need to realize is that this has been a long time in coming. They if one thing is true about the left, they are relentless in pursuing their goals. And so we need to be relentless on pushing back. And we can't be so busy in our lives that we don't actually take an active interest in what's happening in our schools every day. Because
can I say something?
Yes, please do.
Yes, because if you don't think that these things matter, you just have to look at the riots in our streets 2020, that summer, spring and summer, because those kids are a product of the school system that taught them to hate America. Whether your kids are in public schools or not, you should care about these issues for a couple of reasons. Number one, your taxes are being used to promote ideas that many parents think are either intrusive and not the business of the schools or downright wicked. And these kids who are in school today are going to be our culture makers in another 5, 10, 15 years. So we should care about what's going on in our public schools.
Absolutely. And just because you're a Christian doesn't mean you can hide off into your own little world. This will affect you eventually.
Right.
Okay.
It is already.
Well, thanks a lot. All right. That concludes the first segment of this podcast. Thanks for joining me. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. We are going to turn to a completely different topic, and that is energy. As you know, last fall, the Illinois House and the Illinois Senate passed an egregious green new energy deal for Illinois. And of course, Governor Pritzker signed on to it. He wanted it all the time. No mystery there that he was going to do that. Now, this bill, unfortunately, there were actually 11 Republicans who voted for it as well in the Illinois House. Shame on them. Well, you know what? As with a lot of other bills that we've discussed, from budget bills to tax bills, with this bill, there are all these unintended consequences that nobody wanted to talk about when the bill was passed. While it was very foreseeable that some of these things were going to be a problem, the politicians didn't really care to give you the entire story. Well, fortunately, Crane's Chicago business has been very good about detailing some of the issues with the CEJA, the Clean Energy Jobs Act bill. Of course, it's Clean Energy Jobs Act. Who can be against clean energy jobs, right? That's what they want to title everything, but it's absolutely a misnomer. What you're going to find is that in the state of Illinois, you're going to lose jobs if CEJA is completely implemented, which I have said before. We've had experts on discussing this with me, but I have said before that this was all a bunch of virtue signaling, because the idea that you are going to shut down natural gas plants in the state of Illinois by 2045 is ridiculous. It just, you cannot provide the power that we need for our economy and for our households without natural gas. And yet that's what this bill called for. Well, sure enough, it could be sooner than 2045 that we run into problems of supplying energy in our state. Listen to this. This is from Crane Chicago Business. Warnings of summer brownouts downstate spur scrutiny of Pritzker's energy law. This is an article written by Steve Daniels. It just came out April 19th, 2022. And it says electricity costs will soar beginning in June in central and southern Illinois due to inadequate power supplies following coal-fired plant closures. Coal accounts for over 20% of our energy production in this state, electrical production. And yet they thought that they could just replace that with a solar field and a few windmills. Not going to happen. The article goes on, electricity costs will soar beginning in June in central and southern Illinois due to inadequate power supplies following the coal plant closures. The cost of losing coal-fired plants downstate is proving steep already, with many southern and central Illinoisans expected to pay an extra $150 plus on their annual electric bills beginning in June due to inadequate power supply. But higher prices are the least of it. Carmel, Indiana-based Mid-Continental Independent System Operator, or MISO, the regional power grid overseer for much of the Midwest, including downstate Illinois, warned last week that rolling blackouts are possible this summer because of a shortage of power generation capacity. Rolling blackouts in Illinois. Lovely. Critics of policies phasing out coal and natural gas in favor of renewable power are seeing their doomsday forecasts start to come true far faster than even they thought. The price shock downstate also hands Republicans who didn't support Governor J.B. Pritzker's sprawling, costly Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, or CEJA, last year, makes this an issue in the upcoming election. The statute requires the closure of all fossil fuel power plants in Illinois no later than 2045. That's all of them. That's coal. That's natural gas. Effectively, it made the usual method of addressing power supply shortages, which is construction of new natural gas-fired plants, uneconomic and significantly reduced the tools available to address the shortage that's emerged. MISO sounded the alarm last week, saying it was concerned about the rapid closure of coal-fired plants, which have kept the lights on for decades in much of the Midwest. A little caveat here. I actually did go into a coal plant. Actually was producing coal, and it was southern Illinois. I went down there last July, went 1,000 feet down, and then 7 miles out to the face of the coal seam where they were doing longwall mining. Now, that particular coal plant, which produces coal, 100% of the coal that they produced is shipped out of the state. None of it already, because of our strict regulations and the way that the state has been going in terms of wanting to shut down coal. Because of that, none of it was going to a coal plant to actually generate electricity in the state of Illinois. It was going out of state. Some of it was even going out of country, mainly to India. Now, what's interesting here is literally that particular coal plant, the power to operate that coal plant is supplied by energy coming across from Indiana. So what you kind of have going on here is you would have Illinois coal being pulled out of the ground in Illinois and then shipped across a state line, burned at a coal plant across the state line, and that electricity shipped back to Illinois. So they're selling us back our energy. That's what's going on. But we're going to close off all of our coal plants in the state of Illinois. We're going to close off all of our natural gas plants in the state of Illinois. Where are we going to get our power from? We're going to buy it from other states. That's what we're going to do. This is ridiculous. Moving on. In other words, rolling blackouts, which have caused distress in other parts of the country, like California, have yet to be seen in Illinois. Ameren, Illinois, which delivers electricity downstate, says it's optimistic that that outcome can be avoided. They think that they can avoid this. Currently, we are confident that our delivery system is stable and reliable, and power will be there when it's needed this summer. Even hearing MISO's president suggest the possibility of having to shed load is a serious concern, however. So costs are spiking because of the power auction that they just went through. For example, it says this translates into as much as $13 more a month for a typical household, Ameren, Illinois says. Now, $13 a month for a typical household does not sound like a lot of money. It does add up, of course, you know that. But here's the kicker. For an average industrial user, that's another $84,000 a year. That's where you need to start being concerned about whether or not jobs in manufacturing are going to be there, or for industrial purposes. When energy costs go up, it's just one more reason to seek to expand or move your business out of the state. Mark Denzler, CEO of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, opposed CEJA last year, warning it would lead to just this kind of outcome and jeopardize Illinois' energy cost advantage over neighboring states for attracting and retaining businesses. Just what I said. Okay, so the other thing is, what else do I want to cover here? Okay, so the other thing is on this. Okay, here's what's important. Typically, when you do find that you need additional energy, what happens is that a new gas plant is built. But what we find out is that new gas plants, this is from the Pritzker spokeswoman, Jordan Abdea. She says new gas plant build was not prohibited by CEJA. That's what she says. And the ability of gas plants to stay online until 2045 without reaching zero emissions was a legislative concession to gas-fired investors who insisted they could make the economics work and transition to clean hydrogen in the out years. She's right. You could build a new gas plant, but the CEJA bill says that after 2045, you either have to be at zero emissions for that plant, otherwise you're going to have to shut it down. So she's right that it didn't prohibit building new plants, but what investor is going to actually invest in a brand new gas plant knowing that you've only got about 20 years of life in it? That's not a wise investment. And she went on to say that some of these new plants are in the permitting process. Well, Cranes sets the record straight. They say that concession was made to developers that they could continue to open up. That was made to developers of two large gas-fired plants that already were well along in the planning phase. But industry representatives say there's no way they would pursue any other new facilities given the 2045 deadline. That's the real issue here. They're shutting this down long into the future. Northern Illinois, it goes on in the article, which is part of a different regional power grid than MISO, isn't facing the same shortages due to its reliance on nuclear power plants. Commonwealth Edison customers are currently paying more than $4 a month in subsidies to keep open nukes that owner Exelon threatened to close without more ratepayer cash provided under the two state laws, one of which was CEJA. But a prolonged downstate shortage could have an effect in future supplies in the Chicago area. The nukes, now owned by Baltimore-based Constellation Energy Group, a spinoff from Exelon. Yes, Exelon spinned off its nuclear plant. Interesting. Boy, I think maybe that had something to do with, though, Mike Madigan maybe being under indictment and investigation for, giving Exelon, some benefits for jobs. Yeah, that could have been. Anyway, they got rid of it. So anyway, that they're saying that if downstate is suffering, potentially Northern Illinois electricity produced would be sent downstate, which would raise prices up here as well. So Pritzker has aggressively pursued the CEJA last year, making it one of its highest legislative priorities. He hoped to campaign on enacting one of the nation's most ambitious green energy laws. That's what he did. That he actually did do that. The flip side, though, now is that he owns the energy issue in Illinois. No kidding. Not only does Pritzker own it, but so do all these other folks who voted for this bill. The bill was SB 2408, and in the House, there were 83 yes votes, like I said, and there were some Republicans who foolishly voted for this, and there were 33 no votes. I mean, obviously, some of the yeses, looking here in the suburbs where we Breakthrough Ideas has a bigger footprint. Tara Costa Howard voted for this. It's a total giveaway. She thinks that you shouldn't have a gas dryer after 2045. Shut off natural gas. No more natural gas produced. Don't heat your home with natural gas. Nope. Tara Costa Howard, that's a no-no. Deb Conroy, who's running for chairman of DuPage County. Yep, she voted for this garbage bill too. Janet Yang Rohr, Naperville, which has its own coal plant that supplies all of its power. Naperville invested in a coal plant that was state-of-the-art, best technology ever, cleanest coal plant at the time that it was built in the United States. And this was back in, I want to say it was back in 2012, 2008 timeframe. They back there. I covered this, by the way, on multiple other podcasts. I just can't remember that date. But all of Naperville's electricity is provided by that coal plant that is down in west, central, and southern Illinois. It's all by Prairie State coal plant. That is the one that generates all the power for Naperville. And yet Janet Yang Rohr said, nope, you got to close. Coal plants shut down by 2030. No more coal plants shut down by 2030. I do believe that got moved to 2035 in the final legislation. Why? Because Naperville residents are paying for that coal plant, and the bonds are not paid off until 2035. So, that the coal plant could go on for another good 20, 25 years. Life still produce energy for them. They could have gotten their energy at a much lower cost, but nope, Janet Yang Rohr, no coal in Illinois. No coal in Illinois, even though we have one of the largest coal deposits in the world in the state of Illinois. No coal. Can't burn it. Not doing it. Oh, but you know what? The neighboring states are going to burn it, and then they're going to sell back that energy to us. I mean, these guys are foolish. They're just so foolish. Michelle Mussman voted for this. She's a suburban Democrat. Anna Moeller up in Elgin, she voted for this garbage bill. Lots of bad votes here. But they think they know about energy more than you know about energy. They think that they can just tell you you're no longer going to heat your home with gas. You're no longer going to have a gas dryer. No longer going to cook on a gas stove. Oh my gosh, that's already happening in California, by the way. How about this, folks? How about we make Illinois look more like Florida than California? That's where I think we need to go. And that's the opposite of where these Democrats are taking you. So pay attention. Policy matters. Policy matters. I'm Jeannie Ives. Back to you with one more segment. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. I wanted to touch on a couple things maybe you guys don't really pay attention to, but I find it a little bit interesting, and that is how much money are candidates raising right now for their particular races. Well, interestingly enough, when you go to the FEC website, that's the Federal Election Commission's website, you can look up all sorts of information about a particular candidate's fundraising efforts. In total, and I basically went to the House candidates. That's just kind of what I was more interested in looking at. But in total, House candidates have raised over $1 billion this cycle. Now, this cycle starts from January 1st of 2021, and it will go all the way through December of 2022. So it's this 2-year cycle. How much money have they raised? Also interesting, Sean Casten ranks 76th in the total amount of money raised for this cycle. He has raised nearly $2.7 million for this cycle. He's listed as number 76 in the terms of money raised. Darren LaHood, on the other hand, one of our more prolific fundraisers in the state of Illinois on the Republican side, has raised less, only about $2.6 million. So Casten's sitting pretty well. He sits on the House Financial Services Committee. So, of course, you've got a lot of different bank PACs and financial institutions and tax institutions that are contributing to his campaign, as well as your other typical Democrat sort of places like, Planned Parenthood. So that's where he is sitting right now in this money grab. Kind of interesting. If you look at it, too, I'm going to go back to the top here. Wait for a moment. Kevin McCarthy has raised over $17 million, almost $18 million. Nancy Pelosi has raised $15.6 million. Steve Scalise, $13.6 million. Adam Schiff, $13.1 million. Shocking. Dan Crenshaw, he's a Republican favorite, $12.2 million. Liz Cheney, shockingly, over $10 million. I think she's expected to get beat. Just as shockingly, Marjorie Taylor Greene, somebody the Democrats love to vilify and that the Republicans aren't too cozy with either. Marjorie Taylor Greene, though, doing great. People like her. She's raised $8.4 million, and she's just behind Ocasio-Cortez, who's raised $8.9 million, almost $9 million. Jim Jordan's doing great, $7.8 million. He's ranked number 10. So that's kind of the rundown on your top 10 there. Kind of interesting. I did skip over Katherine Porter. I really don't know much about her. I haven't heard her. She's a Democrat. She's raised $13.3 million. She's ranked number 4. That gives you your top 10. And I brought the reason this came to my mind actually was there was a discussion about, and I will try and find that article here. It was about Foster. Okay, so Foster is he's the congressman here, Democrat congressman. He first got elected in 2008. He represents the 11th district here in Illinois. And he's got, quite a few challengers on the Republican side trying to take that away from him in this red wave year. None of them have really done that great. However, Catalina Loft has raised the most money. She's raised about $1.2 million, but her cash on hand is pretty low. I think she's maybe got $150,000 only cash on hand. So I don't know where her money's gone, but it's not that great. Jerry Evans, he's a newcomer, just filed for the first time for this race. He's raised about $111,000 his first quarter out. So, but obviously, Mr. Foster, he's collected nearly $1.7 million this cycle. So he's sitting really well, and he's in a great position to be able to weather the storm. We'll just see what that looks like, though, in terms of the new district, how it aligns with Foster and his principles and Democrat principles, or are we going to see this red wave year? I'm hoping that people like him get out of office and are voted out, because they do not actually vote the same. You might as well have Nancy Pelosi in that office as just to have Bill Foster in there. They vote exactly the same. No difference there, which is what you find with all the Democrat reps in the state of Illinois. You just as well have Nancy Pelosi sitting in that seat. So that's kind of something I thought was a little bit interesting, and we'll continue to watch this. You talk about money in campaigns, money in Congress. Look, the Democrats in this state, they got plenty of cash. It comes from a lot of these big companies that everybody wants to denigrate, that they say they're for the little guy. They're not. They're not for the little guy. They're all about themselves. And if you want to get money out of politics, well, I'll tell you what, the Democrats have cleanup to do on their end. It is not on the Republican side. So moving on, next story I thought was kind of very interesting I wanted to talk to you about. And this comes from us from the Center Square in Illinois. As you know, Illinoisans got their gas taxes doubled. The Democrats, along with 20 Republicans, voted to double our gas taxes in 2019. I'm fair here. I will beat up on the Republicans on bad votes just as much as the Democrats. Anyway, they doubled the gas tax, and on that they put a rider in saying that every July 1st, that gas tax is going to continue to increase at the rate of inflation. So this year, on July 1st, you were supposed to receive a 2 to 3 cent increase in the gas tax at the pump. Well, because gas prices are out of control, and so is inflation in all sorts of other areas that are eating up any income that people have. Because of that, those generous Democrats in their budget passed a proposal saying that we're going to freeze our gas tax. Great. You're going to freeze it at the second highest level in the entire United States, and you're not going to give us a 2 to 3 cent increase. And that is our giveaway. That's our big Benny here. Hey, how about get rid of doubling of the gas taxes? We already in the top 50% of gas taxes back then. But no. We're just going to not give you a 2 to 3 cent increase. That is outrageous. The kicker is they also, as part of that budget package, said that if you are a dispensary for gas, that you must put a sticker at the gas pump. And that sticker actually says, okay, so here's what the actual sticker will say. I found this in an Illinois policy article. They said that the sticker is going to say, as of July 1st, 2022, the state of Illinois has suspended the inflation adjustment to the motor fuel tax through December 31st, 2022. The price on this pump should reflect the suspension of the tax increase. Oh, they're applauding themselves. So you see, it's not really just a freeze. It's only a suspension of the tax through the end of the year. That tax is coming right back on 6 months later. This is such a total joke. I mean, you cannot, the election year politics in this budget, and this is probably the biggest gimmick out of all of them, are unbelievable. And what's Pritzker spokeswoman Emily Bittner say about this? She says, alongside Democrats in the General Assembly, we will continue to put working families first, no matter how much Republicans want to manufacture phony political complaints. Hey, this is not a phony political complaint. You folks are being hyper political. This is ridiculous. Saying to people that you are giving them tax relief at the pump when in reality you're just suspending it, and 2 years ago you doubled their gas taxes. Come on, give me a break. Hopefully everybody sees this for the gimmick that it is. And fortunately for us, there are people fighting back. In fact, the Illinois Fuel and Retail Association plans to challenge the constitutionality of this requirement that gas stations promote a delay in the gas tax increase. So that's good. They should not have to be, this is a free speech issue. They should not have to put a political statement on their own gas pumps for any purpose, for any reason at all. Anyway, Mike Zielewski, he was the big state sponsor of this bill. He's a Riverside Democrat who's been in office way too long. And he goes on to say, we were able to help people at the grocery store. We were able to help people at the gas pump. We were able to help teachers who go out of their way to purchase school supplies for their kids every year. This is all election year gimmicks. Whereas Iowa, on the other hand, which I've mentioned before, what do? They did a permanent tax decrease, and they moved their progressive tax to a flat tax, and their flat tax at 3.9% is significantly lower than Illinois' flat tax. So, Mike Zielewski, maybe that's the way that we need to go. So anyway, I'm thrilled that the Illinois Fuel and Retail Association is suing over this. This is a political stunt in an election year, and you guys should call out the Democrats for it. Everybody needs to know what's going on, and you need to understand we are the 7th highest overall tax burden, 2nd highest when it comes to gas tax, 2nd highest when it comes to property taxes. In fact, there's no way that we're winning on any of the tax issues across the board, from estate taxes to business taxes and on and on. Stay tuned for more information as this entire year develops. What is going to happen in November is going to set the trajectory for the state of Illinois for decades to come. Get in the fight and get informed. Thank you for joining me on The Real Story with Jeannie Ives.